The water was black as oil, and I could hear the 75mm gun mount creaking above me like it was about to tear the whole boat apart, 50 yards to the German shore. Rhine River, March 23, 1945. The engineer next to me was praying in Spanish, and I remember thinking that was odd because I didn't know Rodriguez spoke Spanish. Turns out fear brings out things you didn't know about people. The Sherman turret we'd welded onto this landing craft wasn't supposed to work. Command said it would capsize us in the current, but here we were, and the Germans were already firing. The whole idea was insane from the start. You take a 75mm gun off a Sherman tank, mount it on an LCVP landing craft, and you've got what we started calling a Höllenboot. The Germans had their own name for it, something that translated to devil barges, but I didn't learn that until after. All I knew in that moment was that the boat was listing hard to starboard. The gun weighed more than the engineers promised, and we had 11 men aboard when the maximum was supposed to be 8. I'd grown up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, working in my uncle's machine shop since I was 14. That's what kept me alive more times than I can count. I understood torque, stress points, center of gravity. When they asked for volunteers to crew these makeshift gunboats, most guys said no. Too experimental. Too dangerous. I said yes because I'd already calculated that we had a better chance with the gun than without it. That's what 3 years of combat does to you. Turn survival into mathematics. The first time I saw the Höllenboot design, I was in a supply depot 20 miles behind the line. Sergeant Kowalski called me over. He was from Detroit, worked at Ford before the war, and he had that look mechanics get when they see something that's either brilliant or suicidal. "Sullivan," he said, "tell me this is gonna float." He showed me the blueprints. Some engineer officer had gotten creative. We were about to cross the Rhine, last major barrier into Germany, and the Wehrmacht had every crossing point fortified. Tanks couldn't swim. Infantry boats were getting shredded. So somebody decided to put the two together. The turret wasn't actually a full turret, just the gun mount and shield. We stripped everything we could off a damaged Sherman, one that had taken a hit near Aachen and wasn't going anywhere anyway. The gun still worked. That's all that mattered. We reinforced the hull of the landing craft with steel plates salvaged from blown-out half-tracks. Added ballast to the bow to counteract the weight. The whole thing looked like something you'd build in a junkyard, and that's basically what it was. We tested it in a tributary stream. Kowalski, myself, and a kid named Patterson from Arkansas who claimed he'd been a riverboat pilot before he lied about his age to enlist. Patterson was 17. We all knew it. Nobody said anything. The boat handled like a drunk elephant. The gun barrel had maybe 30 degrees of traverse before the whole craft threatened to roll. But it floated, and it could put a 75mm round downrange, and that was more firepower than any infantry crossing had ever had before. The Rhine crossing was planned for 200 hours. 2 divisions, thousands of men, dozens of boats. The Hellboats were supposed to go in first, suppress the German bunkers, then the regular infantry would follow. Simple plan. The enemy didn't cooperate. We launched at 02:05, 5 minutes late, because one of the boats had engine trouble. I was gunner on Hellboat 3. Kowalski was commander. Rodriguez was loader. Patterson was driving. 7 other guys crammed in for the crossing. Engineers who'd be blown the defenses once we took the shore, except it didn't work that way. The current was stronger than anyone predicted. The boats scattered. We lost sight of Hellboat 1 within 90 seconds. Hellboat 2 took a direct hit from a German 88 while we watched. 1 second it was there, the next it was just pieces and a pillar of water. That's when I learned what happens when a 75mm gun goes into a river at speed. The splash was 30 feet high. Patterson was screaming something I couldn't hear over the engines. Tracers were cutting across the water, these lazy green arcs that looked slow until you realized how fast they had to be moving to glow like that. I was trying to traverse the gun, find a target, but the boat was pitching in the current, and every time I got a sight picture, a wave would throw it off. "Bunker! 11 o'clock!" Kowalski's voice right in my ear. I swung the gun left. There it was. Concrete pillbox, maybe 80 yards upriver, muzzle flash like a strobe light. I fired without thinking. The recoil nearly ripped the mount off the boat. We lurched hard to starboard. Rodriguez went down, cracked his head on the gunwale, came up bleeding and cursing. But the bunker went dark. Direct hit or close enough. Kowalski was pounding my shoulder, yelling something about good shooting. I couldn't hear him. My ears were ringing like church bells. That's when the German fighter came in. I want you to understand something about combat. People talk about training, muscle memory, doing what you're taught. That's all true up to a point. But there's another level, something they don't teach, where you start seeing patterns nobody else sees. I'd been in combat since Normandy. 15 months of fighting by that point. I'd developed this sense, this animal awareness that wasn't about thinking anymore. So when I looked up and saw the FW-190 coming in on a strafing run, I didn't think about doctrine or procedure. I thought about my uncle's machine shop, about the time we'd had to realign a lathe because the mount was loose. I grabbed the hand crank for elevation and started raising the gun barrel. "What the hell are you doing?" Kowalski grabbed my arm. "That's an anti-tank gun." "Not anymore." I kept cranking. 50 degrees elevation. 60. The mount was screaming, metal grinding on metal, welds popping. The boat was tilting worse now. Water was sloshing over the port side. The FW-190 was maybe 300 yards out, coming in low and fast. I could see the wing-mounted cannons, the black crosses on silver-gray paint. The pilot probably thought we were an easy target. Small boat, no anti-aircraft gun. He was right and wrong. I led him by 3 boat lengths and fired. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The 75mm shell crossed paths with that fighter at exactly the wrong moment for the pilot. I didn't hit the plane. The shell passed maybe 10 feet in front of his nose, but the muzzle blast and the proximity of a 75mm round going supersonic right in front of his cockpit, that did something to him. He jerked the stick, broke off the attack, went vertical and banked east. We never saw him again. Jesus Christ, Sullivan. Kowalski was staring at me. "Did you just... We're taking water." Rodriguez pointed to the port side. The extreme angle when I'd elevated the gun had cracked something in the hull. Green Rhine water was pouring in, mixing with the diesel bilge water, and the boat was getting sluggish. Patterson was shouting that we had maybe 2 minutes before the engine flooded. The German shore was still 40 yards away. Behind us, the main wave of infantry boats was coming in. Guys from the 89th Division packed in so tight they couldn't move. If we went down here, we'd block the landing route. I grabbed 2 of the engineers. "Strip the gun. Everything not welded down. Throw it in the river. That's our gun. Do it or we sink." We threw the sighting scope overboard, the spare shells, the ammo boxes. Rodriguez's helmet went in because it was closest. Every pound counted. The boat leveled out maybe 5 degrees. The engine coughed but kept running. 20 yards to shore. The Germans were firing everything they had now. Machine gun bullets were hitting the water like rain, throwing up these little white fountains all around us. One of the engineers, I never learned his name, got hit in the shoulder. He went down without a sound, just this look of surprise on his face. Patterson drove the boat straight up onto the muddy bank. The impact threw me forward into the gun mount. I felt something crack in my ribs, but there wasn't time to care. Kowalski was already over the side, firing his Thompson at a German position. Rodriguez was dragging the wounded engineer. I grabbed my M1 and followed. The next 6 hours are confused in my memory. We took the shore position, lost 3 more men doing it. Found out later that Hellboat 1 had sunk before reaching the German side. All hands. Hellboat 2 we already knew about. Hellboat 4 made it across, but the gun jammed. Hellboat 5's crew mutinied halfway across, refused to continue, turned back. We were the only Hellboat that made it with a working gun. But we'd done what we were supposed to do. Suppressed the bunkers. Drew fire. The infantry came ashore and pushed inland. By noon, we had a bridgehead. By sunset, engineers were putting up a pontoon bridge for the tanks. I grew up thinking war was clear. Good guys, bad guys, heroes and villains. My uncle had been in World War I, never talked about it except once when he'd had too much whiskey at Christmas. He told me that war was really about luck and mistakes, and the winners were just the ones who made fewer mistakes or got luckier. I didn't understand what he meant until the Rhine. The Hellboats were a mistake that worked. The design was wrong, the execution was sloppy. We lost 2 boats and 23 men testing a concept that would never be used again. But it worked long enough to matter. And in war, that's sometimes all you need. I think about that pilot sometimes, the German in the FW-190. I wonder if he told anyone that an American boat fired an anti-tank gun at him over the Rhine. I wonder if they believed him. I wonder if he made it home. After the Rhine, they pulled us back for refit. I spent 4 days in a field hospital getting my ribs taped. Kowalski got promoted. Rodriguez went home. That head wound was worse than it looked, gave him seizures. Patterson disappeared. I heard later he'd gotten transferred to another unit, made it to Berlin, died in a Jeep accident 2 weeks after Germany surrendered. 17 years old. The Hellboats were scrapped. Command decided they were too dangerous, too unreliable. They were right, but they'd needed something desperate to crack the Rhine defenses, and desperation builds strange things. I learned something important on that river. Innovation in combat isn't about elegant solutions or brilliant engineering. It's about taking what you have, what you know, and making it work for exactly as long as you need it to work. That gun should have capsized us. That shot at the fighter should have been impossible. The boat should have sunk. But it didn't, because we adapted every second, threw away the rules, and got lucky. My uncle's machine shop burned down in 1947. I was home by then, trying to figure out what to do with myself. I helped him rebuild it. We didn't talk much while we worked, but one day he asked me if war had been what I expected. I told him no. He nodded, like that was the right answer. I went to engineering school on the GI Bill, spent 30 years designing manufacturing equipment. Nothing glamorous. Assembly line components, hydraulic presses, things that had to work every single day without failing. But I brought something to that work from the Rhine. An understanding that good engineering isn't about perfect conditions. It's about making things work when everything is wrong. I never talked about the Höllenboote, not to my wife, not to my kids. It felt too strange, too specific. Who wants to hear about improvised gunboats? The big stories of the war were about beaches and bridges and famous generals. We were a footnote, an experiment that barely worked. But I've been thinking about it more lately. I'm 93 years old now. Most of the men I served with are gone. Kowalski died in 1998. I went to his funeral in Detroit. His grandson asked me what Grandpa did in the war, and I realized I didn't know how to answer. We'd done a dozen things together, survived a dozen impossible situations, and I couldn't reduce it to a simple story. So I told him about the Höllenboote. The thing about memory is that it's not really about the events. It's about what the events meant, what they taught you. The Rhine crossing taught me that survival is creative. It's improvisational. The guys who made it weren't always the strongest or the bravest. They were the ones who could look at a bad situation and think, what if we tried something nobody's thought of? Mounting a tank gun on a landing craft was stupid, but it worked. Shooting at a fighter plane with an anti-tank gun was stupid, but it worked. Throwing half our equipment overboard to stay afloat was against every rule, but it worked. That's what I want people to understand. War isn't really about following the plan. The plan falls apart the moment you make contact. War is about what you do after the plan fails, about the decisions you make with incomplete information and no time to think. I made dozens of those decisions. Some of them got people killed. Some of them saved people. I don't know if I made more right decisions than wrong ones. Nobody keeps that kind of score, and if they did, I'm not sure I'd want to see the total. What I do know is that every one of those decisions, right or wrong, was made by a kid from Iowa who'd learned to work with metal and tools, who understood stress and torque and breaking points. My uncle's machine shop saved my life more times than my military training did. That's not a criticism of the training. It's just the truth about adaptation. The Germans called us Hellboats. We didn't know that until after the war, when intelligence reports started getting translated and distributed. Turns out there were several after-action reports from German units facing the Rhine crossing that mentioned these devil barges with unexpectedly heavy guns. One report said they were proof that American engineering was both brilliant and insane. I think that's probably fair. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. There was a moment in the middle of that crossing that I haven't told anyone about. We were maybe halfway across, the current was pushing us south, and I looked back at the American shore. I could see hundreds of boats, thousands of men, this whole massive operation, and I realized that our little Hellboat was just one tiny piece of something enormous. We could succeed or fail, live or die, and the operation would continue. We mattered and didn't matter at the same time. That should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. It was actually comforting. The weight of the war didn't rest on our boat. We just had to do our part, whatever that looked like in the moment. We had to get across, suppress what targets we could, and try not to die. Simple, clear, possible. I think that's why I never had the nightmares some veterans describe. I wasn't carrying the whole war. I was carrying my piece of it, and my piece made sense to me. I understood the mechanics of what we were doing, even when the strategy was unclear. There was a chaplain we met about a week after the Rhine crossing. He was making rounds, talking to guys, seeing who needed help. He asked me if I prayed during the crossing. I told him no. I'd been too busy calculating vectors and weight distribution. He laughed, said that was probably its own kind of prayer. I didn't understand what he meant then. I think I do now. The work was the prayer, the focus, the problem-solving, the absolute commitment to the immediate task. That was how I stayed connected to something beyond the chaos. Not through words or theology, but through the simple act of trying to make something work that probably shouldn't work. My wife used to say I was too practical, that I never got emotional about things. She wasn't wrong. I'd learned to channel everything into problem solving, into mechanical thinking. It was a survival skill that became a personality trait. I don't know if that's good or bad. It just is. But I did feel things on that boat. Fear, definitely. Not the paralyzing kind, but the sharp, clarifying kind that makes you faster and smarter. Pride, when that bunker went dark. Grief, when the engineer got hit. Rage, when Hellboat 2 exploded. All of it was there, but compressed, packed down under the need to keep moving. Maybe that's what war does to you. It doesn't remove emotion. It just teaches you to store it for later, when there's time to process. Except there's never really time, so you end up carrying it forever, this compressed block of feeling that you never fully unpack. I'm unpacking it now, I guess. At 93, what else am I going to do? My hands shake too much for fine work. My eyes aren't good enough for reading. But I can remember, and I can talk, and maybe that's enough. The engineer who got shot, I found out later his name was Wilkins. He was from Tennessee. He'd been a coal miner before the war. 22 years old. He survived the wound, went home, died in a mining accident in 1951. I only learned that because I started tracking down records a few years ago, trying to piece together what happened to everyone on that boat. Patterson, the kid pilot, 17 years old, lied about his age, made it through the Rhine and across Germany, died when a drunk driver hit his Jeep in Stuttgart. July 1945. 2 months after victory. Kowalski made it home, worked at Ford for 40 years, raised 4 kids, died of a heart attack watching a Tigers game. Good life by any measure. Rodriguez, the head wound gave him epilepsy. He couldn't work, couldn't drive. Last I heard, he was in a VA facility in New Mexico. I lost track of him in the 80s. I hope he found some peace. The other men on the boat, the engineers I didn't know, I never found all their names. That bothers me more than it probably should. They were on the same boat, in the same fight, and I can't remember them. Memory is selective and unfair. I remember the machine gun fire hitting the water. I remember the smell of the gun after it fired, that sharp, acrid stink of burnt powder and hot metal. I remember Patterson's voice, high and scared, shouting about the engine. I remember Kowalski's hand on my shoulder after I hit the bunker, that solid weight that meant good job, we're alive, keep moving. But I don't remember faces as clearly as I should. Time wears things down, smooths the details away. The men become impressions, feelings, rather than complete people. That's the betrayal of memory. It keeps what it wants and loses what matters. There was a ceremony in 1995, 50th anniversary of the Rhine crossing. They invited veterans back to Germany, held a memorial service on the riverbank. I went. Hadn't been back since 1945. The river looked different, cleaner, smaller somehow. Cities had been rebuilt. Bridges were modern. Everything was peaceful and prosperous. I stood on the German shore, tried to find the spot where we'd landed. Couldn't place it exactly. 50 years changes landscapes. But I could feel it. That sense of wrong place, right place that comes from being somewhere you survived something terrible. A German veteran was there, must have been in his 70s. He came up to me, we started talking. His English was good. Turned out he'd been in a bunker north of our crossing point. He remembered the night, the chaos, the American boats coming across in waves. He said they'd been terrified, outnumbered, knowing they were going to lose but fighting anyway because that's what you did. We shook hands. What else was there to do? We'd been trying to kill each other 50 years ago. Now we were old men remembering the same nightmare from different sides. He asked me what unit I was with. I told him about the Hellboats. His eyes got wide. You were on those boats with the big guns? I nodded. We thought you were crazy, he said. We thought Americans had run out of tanks, so they were putting them on boats. It was terrifying and ridiculous at the same time. We both laughed. Old men laughing about terror. That's what time does to war. Turns tragedy into anecdote, horror into history. But driving back to the hotel that night, I felt something heavy settle over me. Talking to that German veteran had made it real again in a way it hadn't been for years. He'd been there. He'd been on the other side of my gun sight. If we'd met that night in 1945, one of us would have killed the other. Now we shook hands and exchanged addresses. War makes no sense in retrospect. It makes perfect sense in the moment. Kill or be killed, take this position, cross this river, survive until tomorrow. But when you step back and see the whole picture, it's madness. Organized, disciplined, purposeful madness, but madness nonetheless. I came home from Germany and tried to explain this to my wife. She listened. patient as always, but I could see she didn't really understand. How could she? She hadn't been there. The distance between experiencing war and hearing about war is infinite. That's why I'm telling this now. Not to explain war, that's impossible, but to document one small piece of it. One strange experiment with boats and guns and desperate men trying to cross a river. The Hellboats existed for one night. They were conceived, built, tested, used, and discarded in a span of maybe 6 weeks. They saved some lives and cost others. They worked just well enough to matter, then vanished into footnotes and forgotten reports. But for those of us who were on them, they were everything. They were the difference between making it across and drowning in the Rhine. They were proof that improvisation could beat doctrine, that crazy ideas could work if you committed to them completely. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I've been thinking about why I'm telling this story now. Part of it is age. When you're 93, you start wanting to leave something behind, some record that you existed and did things that mattered. Part of it is obligation. The men who didn't make it home deserve to be remembered, even in small ways. But mostly, I think I'm telling this because I finally understand what it means. For 75 years, the Hellboats were just something that happened to me. One event in a war full of events. But now I see them as something more, a parable about human adaptability, about what people can do when they're pushed to the edge. We weren't heroes on those boats. We were mechanics and farmers and factory workers trying not to die. We took what we knew from civilian life and applied it to military problems. We broke rules because following them would have gotten us killed. We succeeded through luck and stubbornness and a willingness to try something insane. That's the real story of war. Beneath all the medals and monuments, it's not about grand strategy or heroic sacrifice. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things because the moment demanded it, and then going home and trying to be ordinary again. I went back to Iowa after the war, worked in the machine shop with my uncle until he retired, then took over the business. Got married, had kids, coached Little League, went to church on Sundays. Normal life, boring by most standards, exactly what I wanted. But the Rhine was always there, tucked away in a corner of my mind. The sound of the gun firing, the smell of the river, the way the boat lurched when we hit the shore, Patterson's voice, Kowalski's hand on my shoulder, Rodriguez bleeding and cursing in Spanish. These aren't memories I chose to keep. They're just what survived. The mind decides what's important. And apparently the Hellboats were important enough to preserve in perfect detail while other things faded. My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. We'd been married 67 years. After she passed, I started going through boxes in the attic, sorting things out for the kids. Found a folder I'd forgotten about. Discharge papers, unit photos, citations, maps. One of the maps showed the Rhine crossing. Somebody had marked the landing sites, drawn arrows showing movement. I found our spot. Hellboat 3 landed 0217 hours, secondary objective achieved, 3 casualties, just lines on a map. That's what we'd been reduced to, lines and arrows and dry military language. But I was there. I remember it all. The reality behind the lines. That's when I decided to tell the story, because the official history is true but incomplete. It tells you what happened, but not what it was like, not what it meant to the men who were there. And if I don't tell it, who will? Everyone else from that boat is gone now. I'm the last one left who remembers. So here it is, the story of the Hellboats. Not a great story, not particularly heroic, just true. Just what happened on one night in March 1945 when a bunch of Americans welded a tank gun to a landing craft and hoped for the best. We got across. That's the happy ending, such as it is. We got across, did our job, survived. Some of us anyway. The Rhine today is a commercial waterway. Barges haul cargo up and down. Tour boats take people sightseeing. It's peaceful and prosperous and completely removed from what it was in 1945. That's probably good. Rivers shouldn't be battlefields. But sometimes I wonder if there's any trace left. If you dove down to the bottom, would you find pieces of Hellboat 2, shell casings from our gun, the equipment we threw overboard to stay afloat? Probably not. The river has moved on, literally and figuratively. That's what time does. Erases, covers over, moves forward. I'm moving forward too, just slower. At 93, forward motion is more theoretical than actual. But mentally, I'm still processing that night, still trying to understand what it meant and why it matters. Here's what I figured out. It matters because it happened. That's enough. We don't need grand lessons or universal truths. The Hellboats existed. We manned them. We crossed the Rhine. That's the story. Simple and complete. But if there is a lesson, and maybe there isn't, it's this. People are capable of remarkable things when the situation demands it. We can adapt, improvise, overcome. We can take a bad idea and make it work through sheer determination. We can look at impossible odds and decide to try anyway. That's not just a war lesson, that's a human lesson. My uncle taught me to work with metal, to understand how things fit together and come apart. The army taught me to fight, to follow orders, to survive. But the Rhine taught me something else. That innovation happens at the intersection of knowledge and desperation. That sometimes the worst ideas are the ones that save you. That luck matters more than we want to admit. I've lived 78 years since that night. Built a business, raised a family, contributed to my community. Normal, unremarkable civilian life. And I'm proud of that. It's what we were fighting for. The right to come home and be normal. But the Rhine is still the most intense, pure, clarifying moment of my life. Everything since has been in softer focus, less immediate. That's not necessarily bad. I don't want to live at that intensity all the time. But I understand now why veterans struggle to explain their experiences to people who weren't there. It's not just about the details. It's about the intensity, the absolute presence that combat demands. For those hours on the Rhine, I was completely alive in a way I've never been since. Every sense heightened, every decision critical, every moment balanced between life and death. It was horrible and exhilarating and exhausting and simple all at once. And then it was over, and we were just tired guys on a muddy riverbank, and the war continued, and eventually it ended, and we all went home and tried to forget. Except we didn't forget. We just stopped talking about it. I'm talking about it now because I'm running out of time. That's the truth of it. When you're 93, you start thinking about what you'll leave behind. My kids will remember me as Dad, the guy who ran the machine shop and fixed their bikes and came to their school plays. My grandkids will remember me as Grandpa, the old guy who told bad jokes and always had candy in his pocket. But there was another version of me, young, scared, determined, who crossed a river in the dark with a tank gun bolted to a boat. That version deserves to be remembered too, not because he was heroic, but because he was there, because it happened, because it was real. The Höllenbootes were real. The men who died on them were real. The fear and confusion and desperate improvisation were real. And now, 78 years later, I'm one of the last people who can testify to that reality. So I'm testifying. This is what happened. This is what it was like. This is the story the official histories don't tell. The human story beneath the strategic overview. We welded a gun to a boat. We crossed a river. We survived. That's it. That's the whole story. But somehow, it's also everything. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The weird thing about getting old is that you start seeing patterns in your life that weren't visible before. I spent 30 years designing manufacturing equipment, and I realize now it was all connected to the Rhine. Every problem I solved, every system I designed, I was applying the same principle. Take what you have, make it work, adapt as you go. The Höllenboot wasn't elegant engineering. It was practical engineering. It solved an immediate problem with available resources. That became my philosophy in civilian life too. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't overthink it. Use what you have, make it work, move forward. My son asked me once why I never became an aerospace engineer or worked on something prestigious. I'd had the grades, the aptitude. I could have gone anywhere after college. Instead, I designed conveyor systems and hydraulic presses for factories in Iowa and Illinois. I told him it was because I understood manufacturing. That was true, but not the whole truth. The real reason was that I'd lost my taste for grand projects and ambitious schemes. I'd seen what happened when you pushed too hard, tried for too much. The Höllenbootes worked because they were simple, crude, just good enough solutions to immediate problems. That's what I wanted to do with my life. Solve immediate problems. Make things that worked. Help factories produce things reliably. Nothing glamorous, but solid and useful. Maybe that was my way of processing the war. Instead of running from it or dwelling on it, I took the lessons and applied them quietly, consistently, for decades. Every conveyor system that didn't break down, every hydraulic press that ran smoothly, those were my peace offerings to the chaos I'd experienced. My wife understood this better than I did. She used to say I was building the opposite of war, one machine at a time. Things that created instead of destroyed, that worked reliably instead of barely, that solved problems instead of causing them. She was right. I was building the opposite of war, though I didn't have words for it until she gave them to me. The Höllenbootes were necessary chaos. My career was ordered creation. Both came from the same place, a need to solve problems with available tools, but the context changed everything. I wonder sometimes what kind of engineer I would have been if I hadn't crossed the Rhine. Would I have been more ambitious, more theoretical? Would I have chased bigger projects, tried to make a name for myself? Probably. The Rhine changed my appetite for risk and my definition of success. After you've survived a river crossing in a boat that shouldn't have floated, stability starts looking pretty good. Reliable starts looking beautiful. So I built reliable things. And I raised kids who grew up stable and steady. And I lived in the same house for 60 years. And I was happy, mostly. The war had taught me to value the ordinary, the unremarkable, the safe. Not everyone came home with that lesson. Some guys came back and couldn't settle, spent their lives chasing the intensity they'd felt in combat. Some came back broken, couldn't function in the ordinary world. Some came back and pretended it never happened, locked it away so deep they convinced themselves it wasn't real. I came back and converted war into work, combat into problem solving, survival into engineering. That was my path through it. Not the only path, maybe not even a good path, but it was mine and it worked well enough. The Höllenboote taught me that works well enough is often the best you can hope for. Perfect is a myth. Good enough, executed with commitment, beats perfect every time. That gun mount wasn't perfect. It was barely adequate. But we committed to it completely, made it work through focus and adaptation, and it got us across. Life is like that too. You work with what you have, you commit, you adapt, you move forward. Some days you're barely afloat. Some days you're taking fire from all sides. Some days the only option is to throw everything overboard except what's absolutely necessary, but you keep moving. That's the key. Keep moving, keep adapting, stay committed to getting across. The Rhine was 300 yards wide at our crossing point. Took us maybe 6 minutes to cross. 6 minutes that shaped the next 78 years of my life. That's not hyperbole. Those 6 minutes showed me who I was under pressure, taught me what I was capable of, demonstrated that survival is more about adaptation than strength. Everything I built afterward came from lessons learned in those 6 minutes. Is that fair? I don't know. Should 6 minutes determine a lifetime? Probably not. But war doesn't play fair, and memory doesn't either. My grandson is an engineer now, works for a tech company in California, designs software. He asked me once if I thought my work had meaning, if making conveyor belts mattered in the grand scheme. I told him about the Rhine, told him how we'd crossed in a boat that barely worked, with a gun that was mounted all wrong, and we'd survived because we committed to making it work. Told him that meaning isn't about scale or recognition, it's about solving the problem in front of you with everything you have. He got quiet, thinking about it. Then he said, "So, every problem is its own Rhine crossing." That stopped me cold, because he was right. Every difficult thing you face is its own Rhine. Dangerous, uncertain, requiring you to take what you have and make it work. Scale doesn't matter. Audience doesn't matter. What matters is commitment and adaptation. The Höllenboote existed for one night and saved hundreds of lives by drawing fire and suppressing defenses. My conveyor systems existed for decades and kept factories running, kept people employed, kept products moving. Different scales, same principle. Solve the immediate problem with available resources. I'm proud of both. The Rhine crossing because we survived. The conveyor systems because they worked. That's enough. Pride is a complicated thing for veterans. We're told to be humble, that we were just doing our jobs, that the real heroes didn't come home. All of that is true, but it's also true that we did something difficult, and we have a right to acknowledge it. I'm proud we crossed the Rhine in that ridiculous boat. I'm proud we adapted when things went wrong. I'm proud we supported the men who came after us. That pride doesn't diminish the sacrifice of men who died. It's just recognition of what we accomplished. And I'm proud I came home and built a good life, that I took the lessons of war and converted them into peacetime productivity, that I raised kids who never had to face what I faced, who grew up in safety and stability. That was the whole point, wasn't it? We crossed the Rhine so our kids wouldn't have to. We fought so they could live ordinary lives. Mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned. My daughter called last week. She'd been reading about the Rhine crossing online, found some references to experimental gunboats. She asked if I'd been involved. I told her yes. Told her about the Höllenboote, about the crossing, about the gun and the fighter and the water coming in. She listened, quiet, taking it in. "Dad," she said, "why didn't you ever tell us this?" I thought about it. Because it didn't fit into our regular life. You kids were growing up normal, and I wanted to keep it that way. War was over. No need to bring it into the house. But it's part of who you are. Maybe, but it's not all of who I am. It's not even the most important part. The important part is coming home and being your dad. She started crying. I'm not sure why. Maybe because she realized I'd been carrying this for 78 years. Maybe because she understood for the first time that her normal childhood had been built on experiences she knew nothing about. Or maybe just because she's my daughter and she loves me and she was sad that I'd been through something hard. We talked for 2 hours. I told her more stories. Not just the Rhine, but other things. Normandy, the Bulge, small moments I'd never shared. She took notes. Said she wanted to write it down for her kids, my great-grandkids, so they'd know. That's when I understood why I'm telling this story now. Not for history books or military records. For my family. So they understand where they came from, what was endured to give them the lives they have. My great-grandkids will grow up never knowing war, God willing. They'll take for granted the peace and prosperity and stability. That's fine. That's what we wanted for them. But they should also know it wasn't always this way, that someone had to cross a river in the dark to make this possible. Not to make them grateful exactly, just to make them aware, to give them context, to show them that the ordinary world they inherit was built by people doing extraordinary things in extraordinary circumstances. The Höllenboote are part of that inheritance. A tiny part, barely worth mentioning in the vast sweep of World War II. But it's my part, my contribution, my river to cross. And I crossed it. That's the end of the story. We made it to the other side, did what we came to do, and went home. 78 years ago. But still here. Still present. Still shaping who I am. The gun fired. The boat lurched. The water poured in. We adapted. We survived. We won. And then we came home and built conveyor belts and raised families and lived quiet, unremarkable lives. Both of those things are true. Both of those things matter. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I've been recording these memories for a few weeks now. My grandson set up a camera, said he'd edit it into something people could watch. I'm skeptical. Who wants to watch an old man talk about boats? But he insisted, and I'm running out of reasons to refuse. The hardest part isn't remembering. Memory is vivid, almost too vivid sometimes. The hard part is deciding what to say and what to leave out. There are things from that night I haven't told anyone, things that didn't need to be told, that don't add to the story, that are just weight I carry. Like the fact that when that engineer got shot, my first thought wasn't about helping him. It was about whether his body would throw off the boat's weight distribution. That's what combat does to you. Turns people into variables, reduces everything to mechanics and survival. I felt guilty about that for 78 years. Not guilty enough to talk about it, but guilty enough to remember. War makes you think in ways that feel inhuman afterward, but were absolutely necessary in the moment. Or the fact that I was excited when the gun hit the bunker. Excited, happy, proud of the shot. I'd just killed several men, and my reaction was satisfaction at a job well done. That bothers me. Should bother me. Those were people in that bunker. People with families and futures, and I ended them with one shot. But I can't regret it either. They were shooting at us. They would have killed us if they could. That's war. Both things are true. I was right to fire, and I killed people who didn't deserve to die. There's no resolving that paradox. You just live with it. My chaplain friend would say that's the human condition, that we're all living with paradoxes and contradictions. Maybe, but combat puts those contradictions in sharp relief, makes them immediate and inescapable. I've talked to a few therapists over the years. Not because I had PTSD in the clinical sense, but because my wife suggested it might help me process things. They all wanted to talk about trauma, survivor's guilt, moral injury. Those concepts are probably valid, but they didn't quite fit my experience. What I felt, what I still feel, is more complicated than trauma. It's recognition. Recognition that I'm capable of things I'd rather not be capable of. That I can reduce people to targets, celebrate their deaths, prioritize survival over humanity. Those capabilities don't go away just because the war ended. They're part of me now. But so is the other stuff. The loyalty to the men in my boat, the determination to complete the mission, the commitment to solving problems and adapting under pressure, those capabilities are part of me too, and they've served me well in civilian life. War makes you confront the full range of human potential, the best and worst of what we can be, and then asks you to live with the knowledge of both. I think that's what veterans struggle to communicate. Not just that war is terrible, though it is, but that war reveals things about yourself that you can't unknow, capabilities and limits that stay with you forever. The Rhine showed me I could stay calm while people were trying to kill me, could make decisions under extreme pressure, could adapt creatively to survive. It also showed me I could reduce people to problems, could kill without hesitation, could prioritize mission over morality when necessary. Both of those revelations were important. Both shaped who I became. Neither is comfortable to sit with. My wife used to say I was too hard on myself, that I'd done what I had to do and should forgive myself. But forgiveness implies you did something wrong, and I'm not sure I did. I'm not sure I did anything right either. I just did what I did, what the moment required, what I was capable of. Maybe that's the real story. Not heroism or tragedy, but capability. The story of what one person could do when circumstances demanded it, for better and worse. The Höllenboote were capability made visible. They were proof that with enough determination and creativity, you could make something work that shouldn't work. But they were also proof that desperate measures come with costs. Men died on those boats, men who might have lived if we'd waited for better options. There weren't better options, though. That's what desperation means. You do what you can with what you have, knowing it's not enough, hoping it will be enough anyway. And sometimes it is. We crossed. The mission succeeded. The bridgehead held. Tanks came across on pontoon bridges the next day, and we pushed into Germany, and the war ended 2 months later. Did the Höllenboote make a decisive difference? Probably not. The Rhine would have been crossed eventually, with or without us. But we made it easier, faster, cheaper in lives. That counts for something. I made a difference in a small way, in a small place, for a short time. Then I came home and made different kinds of differences in different kinds of ways. That's a life. That's enough. One of the questions people ask veterans is whether we'd do it again. Would we serve if we knew what it entailed? Would we volunteer for the same missions? I don't know how to answer that. The person I am now wouldn't do it, couldn't do it. But the person I was then, 19 years old, confident in his immortality, eager to prove himself, that person volunteered readily and would do so again. Those are two different people, separated by experience and time. I can't speak for who I was then from the perspective of who I am now. They're strangers to each other. What I can say is that I survived, and I'm grateful for that. I came home, built a life, had experiences and relationships that wouldn't have existed if I'd died on the Rhine. That's not a moral judgment about war or service. It's just recognition of good fortune. Luck matters more than we admit. Skill matters. Courage matters. But luck underlies everything. I was lucky to grow up in a machine shop, lucky to understand mechanics, lucky to be assigned to a unit that needed those skills, lucky that the boat didn't capsize, lucky that the German fighter pilot broke off his attack, lucky that the bullet that hit Wilkins didn't hit me. Luck? Chance? Fortune? Call it what you want. It was there at every step, invisible but determinative. The men who died on Höllenboote 2 weren't less skilled or brave than we were. They were less lucky. The explosion that killed them could have killed us just as easily. We were 50 yards apart. That's the only difference. 50 yards and pure random chance. Survivor's guilt is supposed to be about feeling bad that you lived when others died. But that's not quite what I feel. It's more like survivor's awareness. Awareness that survival was arbitrary, that I don't deserve to be here any more than they deserve to die, that the whole thing was a cosmic roll of dice that I happened to win. That awareness makes it hard to take life for granted. Every day I've had since March 23rd, 1945 has been borrowed time, a gift I didn't earn. So I tried to use it well. Worked hard, loved my family, built things that lasted. Did I succeed? I don't know. How do you measure a life? By happiness, productivity, impact, love. By all those measures, I did okay. Not spectacular, not terrible, just okay. And after crossing the Rhine in a makeshift gunboat while people tried to kill me, okay feels like a profound victory. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. This is running longer than I expected. My grandson said not to worry about length, that we could edit it down later, but I don't want to edit. I want to get it all out, everything I remember, everything I've been carrying. Because once I'm gone, this is gone. No one else was on Höllenboote 3, except me now. Everyone else has passed. I'm the last repository of this particular memory, and when I die, it dies with me, unless I record it first. That's both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because I can tell the truth without worrying about contradicting someone else's memory. Terrifying because there's no one to check me, to confirm or correct. This is it. My testimony is the only testimony left. I've tried to be honest. I've tried to tell it like it happened, without exaggeration or false modesty. But memory is imperfect, and I'm 93 years old, and some details are probably wrong. The sequence might be off. The dialogue isn't exact. I'm reconstructing it from emotional memory, not recording. But the core truth is solid. We crossed the Rhine in a boat with a tank gun. We adapted constantly to survive. We made it to the other side. That happened. I was there. This is my testimony. My father died when I was 60. He was 83, lived a good long life. After his funeral, my mother gave me a box of his things. Old photos, letters, documents. In it, I found his discharge papers from World War I. He'd been in France, infantry, fought at Belleau Wood. He never told me any of this. I knew he'd served, but he never talked about it, never shared stories. I grew up thinking he'd had an easy war, maybe worked supply or administration. Turns out he was in some of the worst fighting of the war and just never mentioned it. I understand why now. Some things are too heavy to share with your kids. You carry them yourself so they don't have to. That's what parents do. Absorb the weight so the next generation can be lighter. But finding those papers changed how I saw my father. Made me understand his quietness, his occasional distance, his complete lack of interest in anything military after his service ended. He'd seen things, done things, survived things. Then he came home and never spoke of it again. That's what I've done too, mostly. Kept it to myself, carried it quietly, let my kids grow up without the weight. Only now, at the end, I'm breaking that silence. Maybe because I finally understand it's not weight. It's history, testimony, legacy. My father should have recorded his stories. I would have liked to hear them. I would have liked to know what he went through, how he survived, what he learned. But he didn't. And now those stories are lost forever. I'm not making that mistake. My great-grandkids will know what I did. They'll know about the Höllenboote. They'll know that their great-grandfather crossed a river in the dark and came home and built a life. Whether they care is up to them. But they'll have the option to care, and that matters. The sun is setting as I record this. My grandson is behind the camera, patient and supportive. He's heard parts of this before, but not everything. I can see on his face that some of it is surprising him, maybe disturbing him. Good. It should. War isn't a story. It's not entertainment. It's the absolute worst thing humans do to each other, made necessary by circumstances none of us created. It's stupid and tragic and sometimes unavoidable, and the only thing worse than fighting is losing. We fought. We won. That's the simple version. The complex version is that we fought and won and came home carrying pieces of things we couldn't leave behind, and we spent the rest of our lives trying to make sense of it. I'm still trying. At 93, with most of my life behind me, I'm still trying to understand what the Rhine meant, what those 6 minutes taught me, why I survived when others didn't. Maybe there's no understanding to be had. Maybe it just was what it was, a river, a boat, a gun, men doing their best in an impossible situation. Maybe I'm looking for meaning where there's only event. But I don't think so. I think the Höllenboote taught me something fundamental about human nature and adaptation and the will to survive. I think those 6 minutes contained lessons I've been applying ever since, even when I didn't realize it. The lesson is simple. You work with what you have. You adapt to circumstances. You commit completely to the task at hand. You don't wait for perfect conditions. You make do, make it work, make it across. That's how you cross the Rhine. That's how you build a business. That's how you raise a family. That's how you live a life. Work with what you have. Adapt constantly. Commit completely. Keep moving forward. The Höllenboote were floating proof of that principle. They were stupid and brilliant at the same time, barely functional, but exactly what we needed. They worked because we made them work, because we refused to accept that they couldn't work. Life is like that too. Things that shouldn't work, things that are held together with improvisation and hope, somehow get you across when you commit to them completely. My marriage was like that. My wife and I were kids when we met, 22 years old, no idea what we were doing. The first years were rough. Money problems, communication problems, growing up problems. By all logic, we should have crashed like Höllenboote too, but we didn't. We adapted. We worked with what we had. We committed completely to making it work. And it did work, for 67 years, until cancer took her from me. Same principle as the Rhine, different application. My business was like that too. Started with barely any capital, no experience, just confidence and mechanical skill. Should have failed in the first year. Didn't. Because I refused to let it fail. Because I adapted to every problem. Because I committed completely. Same principle, different application. Everything I've succeeded at in life has followed the Höllenboote model. Everything I've failed at is where I broke faith with that model. Where I waited for perfect conditions. Where I didn't adapt fast enough. Where I failed to commit completely. So maybe those 6 minutes on the Rhine weren't just an event. Maybe they were a lesson, a template, a way of approaching life that served me for 78 years. If that's true, if the Höllenboote taught me how to live, then maybe all of it was worth it. The fear, the danger, the losses, the weight I've carried. Maybe it was tuition for a lesson I needed to learn. I don't know if I believe that. Some days I do. Some days it feels like romanticism. like I'm imposing meaning on random chaos. But today, right now, recording this testimony, I believe it. The Höllenboote taught me something vital about survival and adaptation, and I've been applying that lesson ever since. So here's my final testimony. We crossed the Rhine in a boat that shouldn't have worked. We survived through adaptation and commitment and luck. We came home and applied the same principles to civilian life. It worked. That's it. That's the whole story. Simple and complete. The Höllenboote existed. I was there. This is what happened. These are the lessons. This is my testimony. And now it's told. The weight is lighter. The memory is preserved. The story survives. That's all I can do. That's all any of us can do. Tell our truths. Record our testimonies. Pass on what we learned. The Rhine was wide and dark and cold. We crossed it anyway, and on the other side we found Germany and victory and eventually home. That's where the story ends. On the far shore, in the mud, alive. Everything after, marriage, family, work, life, all of it was bonus time, borrowed days, gifts I didn't earn but tried to use well. I'm 93 years old. I crossed the Rhine 78 years ago. I'm still here, still remembering, still testifying. That's my final answer to the question no one asked. Was it worth it? Yes. Because I survived. Because I learned. Because I lived. Because I'm here to tell you about the Höllenboote and the night we crossed the Rhine and what it taught me about being human. That's worth remembering. That's worth preserving. That's worth passing on. So if you've listened this far, thank you. Thank you for letting an old man tell his story. Thank you for keeping these memories alive a little longer. The Höllenboote are gone. The men who manned them are gone. The war is gone. But the testimony remains. The lessons remain. The truth remains. We crossed the Rhine. We survived. We came home. We lived. That's the story. That's my story. That's the truth I'm leaving behind. And now it's yours to carry forward, or not, as you choose. The boat is at the shore. The gun is silent. The river flows on. We made it across. That's enough.